Hello and welcome to my newest video. Today we will take a look at how Finland went from Swedish reign to Russian reign. We will cover what changed and why. Let us start. After Charles XII of the Great Swedish Empire was humiliated and killed, the king's power in Finland declined. The power was brought back to the people living there, and the king was given restrictions and orders to obey. The king no longer had the final say. Frederick of Germany was crowned as the King of Sweden as he accepted these rules. Frederick's reign was known as the time of freedom. The people had the power over the king, whose power was still declining. The king could no longer create new laws. All laws and a majority of other things were done in parliament days, where all ranks would come together and decide laws and other things. At this time it was peaceful in Finland. Amongst the people there were lots more children born. This was most common amongst the rankless people who were the most poor. It was still fairly good to live in Finland even as a rankless person, as the wars did not plague the people. Previously wars were often fought on Finnish soil, which caused lots of taxes on Finns. When the king lost his power, it was a lot slower to make decisions. Even though all ranks were called to decide on stuff, it was mostly the nobles who had the final say. Amongst the ranks there were two upcoming political parties, the Hats and the Caps. The foreign politics of Sweden divided people into Hats and Caps. Hats thought that it was time for Sweden to win a war against Russia by getting allies from France. Caps instead wanted to have the land back that Russia took and create a new Great Sweden. Caps thought that the Swedish reign was too cautious with Russia. Caps wanted a peaceful relationship with Russia. Mainly, Hats were backed up by rich people who admired the French nobility. Caps were backed up by the common people and the merchants. In Sweden, people were proud of the Great Swedish Empire, and they wanted land back from Russia. As the time went by, Hats had more power than the Caps. In 1740, it was time for Sweden to go into another war. In 1742, the Russians invaded the Finnish land as the Swedish army was weakened by then. This time in Finland was called the Small Hatred. The previous Finnish hatred was still fresh in the Finnish memories, and they were afraid of the Russians. This time though, the Russian soldiers were a lot more friendly towards the Finnish population, and the army spent only a year in Finland. The border between Sweden and Russia changed again as the war was over. It was time for Sweden to give up even more land. This happened in the peace treaty of Turku in 1743. The area Russia had conquered started to be called the Old Finland, and Sweden started to accept that their glory days were in the past. After the Finnish hatred, there were a lot of destroyed stuff in Finland. The plague and the wars claimed almost 50% of the population. The people who were mostly suffering this were lifted off of the need to pay taxes for a while. The cities were mostly affected by the plague, which led to many preferring to live in the countryside, leading into less cities being established. In the modern day, there are only very few cities from these times left, as they were mostly built from wood and destroyed by fires. The northern cities conquered the eastern areas that were rich of tar. These cities would become the tar cities, and they grew fast. Dealing tar was so successful that they quickly became the richest cities in Finland. In the medieval times in Finland, usually the farms were owned by the village and everyone worked on the same farm. The countryside were given a new law though. The farm area would be divided evenly amongst the people. These also were used in forests, which Finland had a lot. Not all liked the new system. The forest owners often sold wood to sawmills and tar cities. The whole globe started to get more civilized. Finland and Sweden were not an exception to this. Sweden was actually pretty ahead when it came to the rest of the world, as Sweden had lots of scientists that worked internationally. Sweden created the basis for the evolution theory and both animal and plant names and categories. In Europe, liberalism was common. Liberalists thought that a person should have more say on their own things instead of the rulers. In Sweden, the liberals were mostly priests, Amongst the priests there was a man named Anders Scheidenius, who preached about God and natural science. He was famous for his preaching. Anders also thought everyone should have the freedom of expressing their political beliefs. He managed to make Sweden the first country in the world to have free press, no law censoring the press. After Sweden fought the war against Russia in so-called War of the Hats, the difference between hats and caps just grew larger. Propaganda was no new thing in elections. Many took bribes from foreign countries to get a better light in politics. Hats had the support of the French, when caps had the Russian support. Gustav III was the upcoming Swedish king, and he started to train at 3 years old. Gustav III believed in returning the power for the crown from the people, and he worked towards achieving that. He married the Dutch princess that his mother was against. Marrying her was not Gustav's own choice though, as they were wed as little kids. The Hats had decided her as his wife. The marriage was not successful as after years, the queen was still not pregnant, and apparently the king was not sleeping with her at all. Gustav III did have lovers though, and it has been speculated that he might have been a homosexual. Gustav III's predecessor died, and all ranks were called to talk. Hats and caps were again against each other, but later on the caps won this time. Some nobles were planning to betray the new king, but their plans failed and they were caught. The king called all ranks to discuss about the future of the country. Gustav III had decided to seize power back to the crown, no matter what the people say. The king had placed an army of cannons towards the people who he was negotiating with. He also threatened them with violence, which led to everyone agreeing that the king should have re-given the power over the people. It was time to upgrade stuff in Sweden. Gustav III did not care about religion and declared church to be non-mandatory. The people could now believe what they want instead of having to be evangelic Lutherans. Also, some religions' holidays were removed. The king also banned torturing and lessened the harshness of bodily punishments. To compensate this, he increased the price of fines. Gustav III had returned the power to the crown, but he was more ambitious than that. He wanted to recreate the Swedish Empire. Gustav III wanted to invade Norway, which was owned by Denmark. Russia was in war with Turkey, which gave Gustav III a chance to attack Russia. Eventually, though, he did not end up getting any allies to attack Russia. Even though the king had greater power now, he could not declare an attack on his own. For this he needed the approval of the people. A few Russian soldiers wandered to Swedish lands, which gave the king a chance to declare a war since it was defending, not attacking. It has been speculated if there ever were any Russians on Swedish land or if it was staged. The war did not go as planned for Gustav III, as he lost both on land and sea. Gustav III got allies from the lower ranks against the nobles. He managed to land even more power to the king, one step closer to full dictatorship. The king gave privileges to farmers and workers. For example, if you did not pay taxes in time, you would have far less serious consequences than before. The king also got the power to start wars, even attacking. As the people accepted these laws, there were many nobles who were imprisoned. Gustav III was not in a great favor amongst the nobles. In 1791, the nobles had gotten enough and built a conspiracy against the king. The king had gotten a lot of threats, but he still decided to join the masquerade. His advisors were against this, but no one could change the king's mind. At the masquerade, Gustav III was shot. He eventually survived the shooting itself, but the ammo was rusty, giving the king a severe blood poisoning which was incurable at the time. Sweden and Russia had fought for centuries. Napoleon was conquering very large amounts of Europe. Napoleon from France started a naval blockade, to the British Empire. Russia also joined this, and Sweden was asked as well. For Sweden the answer was clear as day, a big no. Most of the foreign trading was with the British as they bought a lot of tar and wood to build ships. 1808. Russia attacked Sweden without a warning. The battle over Finland was at hand. One reason for the war was that Sweden was still trading with the British. Finland did have Swedish soldiers, but they retreated to attack from Sweden with a larger force later on. It was a cold winter, so the reinforcements had trouble getting to Finland. Like this, the Russians managed to conquer southern Finland, all except the castle of Viapori. The siege castle who should have enough food and supplies to last till the reinforcements arrive. For some reason though, after a few months the castle surrendered with no resistance. After the surrender of Viapori castle, the Swedish forces from the north started a counterattack. The Finns had already been doing guerrilla warfare against the Russians, who were low on supplies. As there were not much supplies for Russians, the attack from the north was a success. After a few moments of joy though, the tables were turned again. Russia attacks and Sweden falls back to north. After a year of fighting, a group of officers dethrones Gustav IV Adolf of Sweden, which led to peace negotiations. All of Finland that was under Swedish reign would now be under Russian reign. Russia named Finland a Grand Duchy that would serve Russia. Finland was also given back the territory Russia had seized before the attack on Sweden. Russians were scared that Finland would be loyal to Sweden, so the ruler of Russia, Alexander, wanted to get rid of the loyalty towards Sweden as quick as possible. He wanted Finns to feel Russian and make the living conditions better than under the Swedish rule. How the Finns felt about Russia was very conflicting. They had not yet forgotten the Finnish hatred, but at the same time Russians were really nice towards Finns now. Russia also had new laws and new church that Finns were not used to. Finland was for the first time in its history to make their own fully owned decisions, which led to a new government being formed. The taxes that were collected in Finland would stay there instead of going to Russia. The currency changed though to Russian ruble. The government also had a general governor from Russia. Other than that, all of the parliament were Finnish. The capital city was changed under the Russian reign. Originally it was Turku, but it would be changed to Helsinki. This was decided by the Russians, as everything that reminded of Sweden should be taken away. Turku had a long history with Sweden and it was very close to Swedish border. 1827 there was a big fire in Turku, which led to the Royal Academy being moved to Helsinki. Western countries saw Russia as an undeveloped and primitive. Alexander wanted Helsinki to be an example how modern Russia is. They tried to build Helsinki to look as modern as possible. We are not Swedes. We do not want to become Russians. So let us be Finns. After 1809, the Russian Tsar wished Finland to be a good duchy for Russia. So there were changes that needed to be done to achieve this. Politics and army changed a lot, but other things were fairly similar. For example, the upper class still spoke Swedish. Also, Swedish art was in favor over Russian art. The Lutheran Church was still widely used even though Finland was still under Russian reign. Finns didn't want Russian to become the official language, replacing Swedish. Though Russians wanted to get rid of Swedish, so the logical option would be to use Finnish. But there were no literature in Finnish. Phenomania started to spread. Phenomania means wanting to increase Finnish language in the country. Against that was Svekomania, which was the opinion to only have one language, Swedish. The Tsar accepted Finnish as the official second language.